All right, we're going to go ahead and get our work session started on this January the 18th, 2024, 5 o'clock. Can I have an adoption of the agenda?
Move to adopt the agenda as presented.
Okay. All in favor, raise your right hand. No. Do I have a second?
Second.
Jump the gun. There we go. All in favor, raise your right hand. Say aye.
Aye.
All right, none opposed. All right, we're going to go ahead and move to agenda item 2.01. We're going to turn it over to our communications executive, Dr. Berger.
Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be here to kick off a presentation on our comprehensive communications audit that took place this year. We engaged the National School Public Relations Association with conducting a comprehensive audit that began in September, really ran through the month of September, and then continued, our auditors continued their analysis through the fall. We've just recently received a comprehensive report of their findings and recommendations. We conducted this audit as part of our accountability measures for our CSIP commitment to comprehensive communication. We also had not conducted an audit since the 2018 to 2019 school year when the district was under different leadership, and we felt like it was time for a comprehensive set of data and research on communication preferences in the district. So in a minute, it's going to be my pleasure to turn over this presentation to NSPRA Auditor Naomi Hunter, and she's going to go over perform an overview of the results for you. But first, as you know, if you've had an opportunity to look at our report, there's different components of our audit process, from a survey to focus groups to a review of all our district materials. I just wanted to provide you some information about the formulation or the formation of those focus groups, because I have a feeling you might ask some questions about that. So as far as the focus groups, it's very important for you to know that the PR team doesn't participate in those. We are removed from that process, but we are charged with forming those groups. So our auditors charged us with forming 10 groups of 8 to 12 individuals made up of different stakeholder groups. We chose to form 5 external groups: students, elementary parents, secondary parents, community leaders, and community members without children active in our system. We also chose to form 5 internal groups: associate superintendents, assistant superintendents, principals, teachers, and support staff. And the auditor also interviewed the PR director, myself, the superintendent, and the Board of Education, as you know. And as you can see, the stakeholder groups were designed to be, stakeholder specific, so to speak, and that was intentional. And there's one other element that I just wanted to make sure you were aware of. NSPRA is very intentional about power dynamics, so one of our charges was to create groups where an employee would never be with their supervisor. So that explains a little bit of the formation of those internal groups, why there was strong delineations between employee function, if that makes sense. So overall, we had about 100 people participate in our focus group. 48 of that 100 applied through our 3-pronged engagement process, where we took applications for the CSIP and the CFMP as well. All 48 were accepted. However, some folks declined to participate because of the timing or did not respond to the invitation. So in all, folks were invited to this process through the application, or they were invited to participate based on role, particularly for those internal groups. So for example, a principal or a student, we knew we needed to invite specific stakeholders, or they were recruited from the CSIP or the CFMP. So we were actually able to offer more than 20 spots to folks who, because of capacity, were interested in participating in the CSIP or the CFMP. There wasn't enough slots. We offered them a different way to volunteer with the district and to serve their time in that space. So I'm about to pass it over to Ms. Hunter, and she's going to go over recommendations and findings from this process. We are essentially right now live streaming a live stream, so we've done some audio testing, and what would be very helpful is if, when we get to the questions part, Ms. Hunter is going to present for 25 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up for questions. If you can turn your mic off immediately after you ask a question, that's going to help her hear you. I will be here if we need a middle person to just translate. So without further ado, Ms. Hunter, if you want to take over, I think we can hear you all right, and you may start your presentation.
Thank you. Let me just go ahead and get the presentation set, and I will screen share. Okay. Are you able, can somebody answer to let me know that you can see my, are you seeing my presentation or my notes? Can I ask that? Are you seeing?
We can see your presentation.
Okay, not the notes.
Correct.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here to present. I want to start with an apology because I was originally planning to come in person. I was very much looking forward to that, but I came down with a virus that has really prevented me from getting on an airplane for a few weeks. So before I get started, I just want to ask your patience if I need to pause to cough, clear my throat. Hopefully that won't occur, but just ask for your patience. I am getting a ton of feedback. Is there any way to turn off your mic while I'm talking? Uh, Okay, I'll just keep going, no problem. It actually seems a little bit better right now. So today what I'm going to be doing is giving you a general overview of the presentation. I'm going to talk about what an NSPRA audit is and what it involves. I'm going to talk a little bit about your specific audit and some of the things we did. Katie set me up nicely for that. I'll be sharing some of the key findings and observations that I had after reviewing all of this. And then I will end with talking about some of the recommendations and considerations for implementations. And I hope we have a lot of time at the end to go ahead and have some good discussion and dialogue. And I encourage that. So just to give you a little bit of background, you had an auditing team that consisted of me. I was the auditor. We also had Melissa Bram, who's our associate director, and Susan Downing, who's our audit coordinator. The audit goes through an extensive editing process. So it begins with the work that I do, but you're also benefiting from the expertise and background and experiences of our entire team. I also had an audit note taker assistant with me in this audit. Her name was Ashley Michelle Tublin, and she took notes for me. So we like to think of a communication as sort of your roadmap to better communications. So the goal of this audit was to seek to seek data around communication and perception of your district, to understand the opinions and perceptions, and to address the effectiveness and management of the public relations and marketing function in your district. We always look at a wide range of background materials. This is a snapshot in time, but it also really, because of the depth of the conversations we have in our focus groups, it does really reflect underlying trends and factors that are affecting how your district is perceived. We provide very customized recommendations that are built on what we heard, and they're designed to enhance the communication program that you have in place already. So in your case, the audit process began with your staff providing us with a wide range of materials. We looked at everything, and I want to just say, Katie probably provided me a more comprehensive set of background materials than any client that I've worked with so far, and I've done quite a few audits at this point. We looked at all of your print and digital publications. We reviewed your board policies around communication. We looked at strategic plans. Um, we looked at background on your campaigns. We looked at programs, media coverage, your website, your social media. So it was really a very comprehensive process. And that was in addition to the data from the scope survey and the focus groups that we held that provided us with qualitative data. Regarding the scope survey, your district did extraordinarily well with participation from parents and staff. We usually set a target of 5% margin of error or confidence interval for parents and staff. You well exceeded that. We set a goal of 10% for community members. That is something that almost no district that we work with is able to achieve Actually, LSR7 came closer to hitting that target than most of the districts I work with. And I just want to assure you that the data that we have is reliable data. It's based on margins so that even though you have many more parents and staff and community than filled out the survey, there are formulas that are standard formulas to let us know that this data is reliable, and it is. It is representative data. I also want to just point out that this is a little bit different than the data you might be used to when you look at polling, where a 1 or 2% difference um, in numbers can have a very big impact. This data is really used more in strategic ways to help Katie do some fine tuning. So though your participation with the community was a little bit lower, we did get really excellent qualitative data from the focus groups. As Katie said, I'm not going to go over all of these because she's already talked about it in depth, but we conducted 10 focus groups as well as interviews with the superintendent, with Katie, and with several of you, which I really enjoyed. And the core of these groups is really for us to listen. And I went into the focus groups already knowing what the scope data told me, which allowed me to probe and ask questions in a certain way. We told all participants that their comments were anonymous and that if they were quoted in the report, it would be only in a very generic way. Your groups were fantastic. I just want you all to know you have a wonderful community. I felt a level of engagement in the focus groups that's not always present. I felt that people felt very free to talk frankly with me. I felt a level of trust, and even when critical information was being shared, it was really obvious to me that your community has a lot of affection for you. And even in sharing constructive criticism, they were really doing it, I think, out of an investment of wanting to help the district improve. In terms of the perception of the district, your district, we compare our scope data against 100 districts, more than 100 districts that have also participated in the data. And we use averages of the 1 through 5 rankings that are part of each question. And for each of our clients, we provide your number compared to the national average, the national low, and the national high. And you did very well in terms of perception of the district. Your perception is well higher than the national average. The perception from staff, I mean, from parents, your perception is a little bit above the national average, and it's also above for community. In terms of percentages, the way that falls out is 72% of your parents, 79% of your employees, and 61% of your community members um, view the district as um, excellent or above average. And I want to say that when you merge that with the average category, it's even higher. A very small number, 5 to 6% of each audience rated the district poorly. That's a really great result. These were some of the things that we heard just about perception. This is not necessarily about communication, but we asked each group, what are your overall perceptions of LSR7? And what I heard back is excellent academics, wide array of opportunities. This is a destination district. That was a phrase that was used over and over and over again. In almost every focus group, I heard people use that description. I heard about strong partnerships with the business community, and the business community members that I talked to concurred that the district is really deliberate and interested in partnering. And also, I know you had very strong results for your most recent ballot measure that really suggests that you have robust backing from your residents. And again, that's what I heard in the focus groups. Even from those who had some suggestions on how to make things better, I felt a very deep investment in your local schools. Some of the areas of challenge that came up specifically related to perception are that your community has grown so fast and that it's changing as so many communities are changing in the United States right now. And this is putting strain on the system. Old ways of doing things don't necessarily work. Ways that that older folks in your community were used to interacting with the district are a little bit different now. Another thing that I think is affecting LSR7 and many other districts is just general cultural divisions in our wider culture nationally. This plays out in social media, and we are really seeing this in many of our districts. Um, we see that trust is growing. Numerous people talked about in the past feeling a decline in trust in the district, but also many people that I talked to when I was there said they feel like in the last few years that has really bumped up. I only raise this because I think you just need to keep your foot on the gas pedal with this and keep working on it. Some of the past challenges are still impacting perception, even though the trajectory seems to be going in the right direction. Specifically about communication, after looking at everything, reading through my notes, looking at the data, reading through all of Katie's materials, what I see is that you have a robust and highly effective communication program. You have a highly qualified team of communication professionals with a variety of background and experience that they're bringing to their work. The satisfaction levels in the scope survey around communication were high. They were higher than many of the districts we survey. What I personally saw just looking at your website, oops, sorry, I think I inadvertently advanced the slide. Um, I see that you really excel in branding and storytelling. And I did hear from some board members as well as district leaders that you feel like you could be doing better with storytelling. I think that's always the case. Nevertheless, I think you're strong. Your district is strong in that area, and I think that's reflective of Katie's background as a journalist. I also see that you are actively involving and seeking to involve your community. I think the strong level of interest in participating in the focus groups is wonderful evidence of that. As far as some of the areas of improvement regarding communication, and I expected this going into the focus groups after reviewing the scope data and just knowing how this, again, is a bit of a general problem that many districts are facing. But stakeholders are overwhelmed by the daily influx of information they're getting. Um, Not all of this is something that a school district can control, but we definitely have suggested some strategies in the recommendations of ways that you can manage this perhaps a little bit more than it has been. Part of the problem, I believe, is that there's a surplus of communication channels. One of the primary things that I heard in focus groups is that there was confusion. From parents, it might be confusion about where to go to get information. From staff, it might be confusion about what platform they're supposed to use or where they're supposed to post information. I also see that the changes and the rapid growth in your community might require a higher level of communication strategy. It may be the case that at this time, you might need to think about some strategies to reach certain audiences and other strategies to reach other audiences. I'll talk about that a little bit more when I get to the recommendations section. I also see that just the general decline of trust in education is creating complexity for you. That is just something to acknowledge. I don't think you can make that go away. Um, but again, we do try to offer some strategies to help you get a little bit ahead of that. Misinformation and disinformation on social media is something that I think the board members that I talked to in particular brought this up with me, but we also heard it in focus groups, and it is very distressing. Again, there is a growing body of data and research on how to deal with that, and actually, NSPR is going to be doing some work in this area coming up. So stay tuned for that. So now I'm going to move into the recommendations. What I'm going to do here is not go into a lot of detail. I'm going to leave it to your questions if there's something you don't understand. So I will just speak very briefly to each of the recommendations. But Katie has an unusually strong communication plan in place already. many districts that we audit don't even have a strategic public relations plan, and she does. So that is, you're way ahead of the game. I think with this audit and with the data that we've provided you, it's really going to give Katie some tools and um, more detailed data to set some measurable objectives, to put some metrics out there, to use some of the recommendations that we suggest to fine tune her strategies and tactics. So, our recommendation number one is to take our audit findings and incorporate them and revise the existing public relations strategic plan. I also want to say that the way the scope survey is structured gives you an opportunity to evaluate perhaps in a way that you haven't been able to evaluate before, because you can look at a metric such as satisfaction with communication, and you can take the number you have now, and in a couple of years you can test that again and see if you've moved the needle, see if the satisfaction with communication has moved up. So we're really hoping that this not only gives you a way to improve, but a way to know whether or not you're making the progress you want. Recommendation two is to address information overload through standardization. I think this was probably the most primary and dominant finding of the audit. And so it's one I really want to make sure that I spend a little bit of time on this particular recommendation. First of all, we strongly suggest that you conduct a review of the tools you're using. They're all good tools. Perhaps there's too many of them. And it's not necessarily for us and Sprit to make that call, but we do recommend that internally you really take a look at that. I The amount of information coming out of the PR department office is very impressive, very thorough, very comprehensive. Um, we do suggest that you consider streamlining it just a little bit. And again, it's really up to you to figure out where, or up to Katie to figure out where that happens. Um, One piece of feedback that I got is that the district is so thorough sometimes in putting out information. Some people said they longed for more elevator speech style communication. So that is one of our recommendations. Katie's already providing sample messages, but we just want to suggest that you continue doing that. Um, One important thing is the issue of the school websites. And I do want to talk about that a little bit because I know that there has been a really beloved tradition in your district for the high schools to have student run websites. However, when I dug in and I looked at the scope data around websites, and when I listened not only to the parents but to the students, it became clear to me that um, there are areas where those school websites are not consistent with the quality of your district website. And I believe that there are ways that you can keep the students involved and still achieve some standardization. So we are making the recommendation that you move the high school websites onto the final site platform so that they're in alignment with everything else. Recommendation three, I'm not going to dwell on, but it is just to provide communication support and training to staff at all levels. And, a communication audit is often seen as something that is assessing the communication of the PR department in particular, but really, when people talk about communication, they're thinking about everything from what they receive from a teacher in the classroom to their principal to somebody at the district office. And it it seems to me that it will help you to put some standards in place or protocols in place. Just make sure that everybody understands what their role is and get some basic training, in concise writing and things like that. And there are detailed recommendations in the reports. I'm not going to go into that much further. I will say Katie does have already an existing ambassador program. We thought it was very strong, and our only recommendation there is to expand it. Um, Recommendation four is around practices to inform and engage diverse families. And one thing I want to say about this is it can be hard to get the feedback in an audit that perhaps you're not doing this um, at the level that you want to be doing it. And I want you to know that I see the intent and the effort. And I think that LSR7 is moving in the right direction very strongly. We really like the idea that you have the dignity team set up. So we really want to encourage you to just keep going in this area. We provide some specific recommendations, but again, um, I would say at this point in time, most districts find it a challenge to engage with all parents, especially districts like LSR7 that have experienced rapid growth and some demographic change. So we just encourage you to keep going with what you're doing and incorporate a few of the new suggestions we provide. Recommendation 5 is about building trust by nurturing two-way communication. I was so happy when I was there and I talked with some of you about the engagement that you as a board are doing and the town hall meetings. That is going in the right direction. I think it had not yet started when I was there. It was sort of in the works. Um, we love that idea. We included some recommendations in the report just for how you might consider making those sessions really effective. I also would suggest, in the spirit of transparency, that you share this audit. And in the report, we've included some suggestions about that. And we also gave some ideas about an infographic that just might help your employees understand the difference between one-way communication, which is broadcasting out, and two-way communication, which is providing information, active listening, looping back. Um, there was a bit that I heard that is not on the slide but came out in the report about people feeling that they give input, but they don't always necessarily hear the outcome of the input. And so that's another thing that was covered in the report. And I think that's a very simple thing to do that goes a really long way. It's just reporting out, starting with this communication audit. Enhance and expand and enhance Board of Education communications. You're doing a great job. It's very obvious to me that this board is really committed to communication. I know it's been one of your core goals, yours and previous boards. Um, our suggestions here are simply to review your communication policies. You have many of them in place already, but we just suggest making a regular practice of reviewing those. Um, we suggest reviewing your guidelines for community board communication so that it's really clear who's supposed to respond to inquiries from the community or from communication that you get that's outside of a board meeting. Um, we made some suggestions in the report about revising the format of your board summary, and we suggest a little bit of enhanced presence for you on the LSR7 website. Recommendation 7 is about combating misinformation and disinformation. Um, Again, this is covered in some detail in the report. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. I will highlight just one of these bullet points, which is building a network of digital ambassadors. In the olden days, before we had social media, we would often recommend to districts that they establish a key communicators network. It's sort of a communications best practice, and it's a really good idea. But in this day and age, information is more spread on social media than necessarily at PTA meetings. And so, what we are recommending is a network of digital ambassadors, of um, folks who will agree to regularly post on their own pages factual information, background information, things coming out of the district. And that's just a way of making sure that there is constantly a flow of information that is accurate and true. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is there's a section of the report that benchmarks your communication against best practices nationwide. So is where everything I've shared with you right now is based on what I heard and what I saw. This is more based on what you're doing compared to what would consider to be the very best Cadillac way of doing communication. And Enster has a whole, it's almost like an encyclopedia of communication best practices. Um, And I believe Katie's been given a copy of that along with the audit. Um, it provides a checklist of things for districts to do. And it suggests that um, when you're emerging, you're going to be doing certain things. When you're just starting to work on an area, when you're established, you're going to be doing certain things. And when you're exemplary, meaning you are a model that other districts can follow, you will be doing certain things. So your district did really, really well in this category. It's hard, I think, to tell without seeing the ratings that other districts get, but I will say these are some of the highest ratings that I have personally given to a district. Um, your program I considered exemplary in crisis communication and bond and finance communication, and really just at the brink of being exemplary in your comprehensive professional communication and internal communication. And Katie and I have had conversations about this. She really is to be applauded. I just want to make sure you know that this is rather unusual. Um, and the only area that was emerging is the area of diverse, equitable, and inclusive communications. But again, it's very obvious that this is an area where you're putting a lot of priority. So I have no doubt that you're going to be moving the needle in that area as well. So, sort of in closing, I just want to share a few considerations with you that these recommendations involve more than anything that can be done by the Public Relations Department alone. Improving overall communication in a district really is a team and collaborative effect. It's also long term. There's this plan that we've given you, or this assessment is very comprehensive. It is not something that can be implemented all at once in 1 year. I would say the maximum amount of recommendations you can undertake would be 2 to 3 per year. So you should really look at this as a 2 to 3 year project. Um, and, we presented our recommendations sort of in the order that we thought they should be addressed, although it's certainly up to you to decide how you want to do that. So at this point, I am going to stop sharing my screen so that we can have some dialogue and I can take your questions.
All right, thank you so much for that presentation. My first question that I have here is, how much did Katie pay you? No, Katie, she does a wonderful job, and we appreciate. I don't think you heard me, but it's all right. I'm sure you're laughing on the inside. But
I'm sorry, I didn't. Could you repeat that comment? I missed
I
it.
asked, how much did Katie pay you?
Oh,
No, but no, Katie
you're
did a.
lucky to
She,
have. Katie paid me nothing, but I will say that all the comments that I made are very sincere.
I truly appreciate that. I'm going to open it up to the board for any questions. Dr. Johnson?
I do have a question. In terms of how the community is growing, a comment that we've grown over the 20 years, are we, I guess, compared to neighborhoods nationally, are we on like an average, or we're doing, less growth or more growth than what the average neighborhood would see for a school district like ours?
Do you mean in terms of size growth or in terms of your communication effort in relation to the growth?
The size growth.
Yeah, I don't really have data on growth, but I mean, I live in California, and I can tell you in California, most school districts are in decline. And so, the amount of growth that I see in your district was surprising to me. I actually recently audited a district in Virginia that also has experienced really rapid growth and are having many, many of the same challenges. I would say almost parallel challenges.
Okay, another question I have, when we heard about the comments about academic rigor declined, I'm reading some of that in the document. I'm trying to, did they talk about why they think that is? Or is there any discussion? Why do they think there's a decline when we have data that has testing scores and things like
Yeah,
that? What's the feeling or what's the thought?
I think that a lot of that is, well, I will say people cited ratings, but I will say that I have personally done a lot of work in this area myself. And what I have noticed is in the last 5 to 10 years, as rating systems like Great Schools and Niche have become more and more prominent, that it creates that impression, because I'm sure that most of you and most of your district leaders would not ever assign a 1 through 10 quality rating for your schools, right? It's so much more nuanced and complex than that. There's a lot of factors that go into it. Um, but the average person out in the public, they just see this link and they see it on real estate listings. It's listed now. If you go to buy a house, you can click right on and see what the rating is for that school. It might give people the impression that um, that the school's not doing well, when in fact, when you begin taking on more students who aren't native English speakers, that's going to naturally have an impact on some of those numbers. So I don't know if that's a completely satisfying response, but the people who said it, I think we're really basing it on numbers and data. And so my my advice about that is to really try to educate people about what those numbers mean, and to try to work with your community to understand the nuances behind what makes a good school, what makes a good teacher, what affects your test scores.
Thank you.
Board Member Murdoch.
I just have two questions for you. The first one is, were there any discussions about secondary language communications as a part of the audit, in terms of all the languages spoken within LSR7 and how to do communications surrounding different languages?
I'm sorry, the question is whether people brought that up in focus groups.
Or was there, was it brought up in focus groups, or would you have recommendations as we continue to become a more diverse district, have more language barriers, those kinds of things?
Yeah, it didn't come up a lot in the focus groups. I do know that you've established a welcome center. I think that's really a marvelous idea to do that. And I think that really helps. I happen to work for a district that have had a very high number of English language learners among our parents and students. And one of the things I learned from that was that it's not just a matter of providing translations or inviting people to take a survey or participate in a focus group in their language. Those are really important things to do. But actually, things like the Welcome Center, I think, is even more vital. I think giving families a way to understand the US system of education, to educate those families about what information means and not assume that they understand all the terms and languages we're using, is one thing that you can do for that. And again, also, I think it's a matter of educating your English speaking parents, especially your longer time residents, about some of the challenges that families are facing, to build some understanding and compassion for some of the trauma that the newcomers may be experiencing.
I appreciate that. And then the other thing so one of the big focuses obviously is on trying to streamline communications. Um,
Yes.
you know, uh, we tend to yo-yo in this realm, right? In terms of trying to provide as much communication as possible. You try to
Yeah.
streamline, and then the moment you streamline, then people get critical because you eliminated a source of information or streamlined it,
Yeah.
those kinds of things. So it's actually a secondary question. As a part of streamlining, what is the process for notifying and educating community members, staff, even students on how we are streamlining things so that then you hopefully can minimize some of that frustration?
Yeah, I think a couple of thoughts there. I think one thing is to tell people, to provide people with guidance documents in multiple places so that they understand, this is where I go for this is where I go for that. Um, One mom in particular, this comes to mind with your question. There was a mom who said, I'm a really, really busy person, and I had to miss back to school night because I had a work obligation. And that was the night that the teacher explained to everybody, um, this is where you find this is where you find that. It was sort of like, back to school night orientation. And she said, why couldn't you just make a video so that if you have to miss back to school night, there's just something online that tells you this is how we communicate in LSR7. This is what you would expect from your teacher. It's what you expect from your principal, from your district in an emergency, etc. So I think that's one simple thing. And that was an idea that is in the report. Um, the other thing, and I don't recall actually if this is in the report, but one other thing that could be considered is to seek further input from some of the people who weighed in, to pull a little committee together as you're doing this review of vendors, maybe not just decide it internally, but at least have a meeting or two where you get feedback from teachers, parents, community members as you're considering changes, get some feedback from other people too on what tools would really work best.
Okay, any other questions from any board members? Okay, I just have this is more for the board. One of the recommendations was 6, which was 6.1, which was expanding or enhanced Board of Education communications, looking at a policy review. And so I think that's something that, if that's the appetite of the board, that we actually look at that recommendation, look at some of the language that was even provided, and see if that is something that we want to have a discussion on during a work session to be able to expand that communications policy. Any other?
I'm sorry, was that a question? Or
It wasn't a
comment?
question. It was more of a comment to the board, and
Oh,
just
okay.
around your recommendation of action step 6.1.
Yeah, I think just to expand on that a little bit, we often put suggested board policies in. We know every state has, um, a bank of policies to draw from your school boards association, and every district has its own conventions and protocols. So I definitely don't want to be too heavy-handed in telling you what your policy should be. Those are really just ideas for suggestion and review. I think the most important thing is not that I'm recommending change, but that I'm recommending that you be deliberate about thinking about what you need. And I think that is something where you would be working hand in hand with Katie, because I think Katie probably has a really good handle on what policies are going to help her to implement effectively.
Absolutely appreciate those comments. Also, just so that you know, since the last time that you did speak with the board, we did not do any of the town halls or the World Cafe models. We have actually completed 2 already. And so we are working, and Katie has worked very close with the board of being able to kind of get that off the ground. And so we appreciate this audit. We also appreciate Katie and the work that you're doing and your team. So wonderful audit. Thank you for doing this. This was great for the board to hear. And then I'm sure there'll be ongoing conversations of how we can best support each other. Is there any other questions from the board? Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on to our next item.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I hope you feel better.
Thank you so much. Again, thank you for your flexibility.
Absolutely. Our next item is going to be 2.02. This is our Board of Education self-evaluation. Let me kind of just make a few comments, and then Dr. Buck can chime in. So this is something that we have to do as a board. This is something that we have had discussions about. Do we find an outside facilitator to kind of help us guide this work, or do we utilize MSBA, who is kind of at our fingertips? I will tell you that me and Vice President Foley did kind of make the executive decision just to utilize MSBA because of our timeline, so that we can get this done. There are pretty much 2 options that is kind of on the table right now, and that is having to get the survey and let's complete the survey, and we kind of just have the discussion, or to have it facilitated by MSBA. And so that information is kind of in our board packet. Dr. Buck, is there anything that you would like to add, other than he also sent an email, so you can also look at that?
Yeah, the question was, do we have what the questions are? I do not have them now. I think you guys have asked MSBA, and they haven't had a chance to respond yet. But I found 2009. It's been a hot second since then. So I'm sure they're not the same. There's like 108 or something like that. And I can tell you in 2015, there was 95. So they do change those, but they're in buckets. is what they do. They usually have about 6, 7, 8 buckets of questions. And so you can do it two ways. So MSBA will do it where you ask questions individually, you fill them out, and you come together as a work session without MSBA present. That's $150, I think is what it is for that portion. And then you could have them come and facilitate. So you would do the questions separately. They would come and facilitate the conversation about how to work with those data. I've seen districts do a 30-year rotation where they bring MSBA in. In the odd years, they do either MSBA questions without a presentation work session, or they come up with their own questions in between years. So there's many different ways you can do it. The most important thing is you just have a conversation.
And I agree. And then the cost for the facilitation, I believe it's like $580 to be able to do the surveys. One of the things that I will say, and that information is provided, and then we'll hear from Vice President Foley, is that they're wanting us to complete the survey and then have at least a 2-week gap before the facilitation piece happens. And so the reason why I kind of wanted to see the questions was to see if this was something that I felt like I or one of us could facilitate. It's a little bit more in depth than I thought. And so that was going to help me kind of gauge where my position would be on if we wanted to facilitate or just have a group discussion. Vice President Foley?
Yeah, so the thing that I was going to throw in there is I believe the questions for this board self-evaluation is what I shared from the MSBA summer share out. So I did have the packet, and it was more like a rating scale with like a kind of an emerging to, I can't explain it very well, but about the levels of knowledge for a board member and different relations and things like that, and you rate yourself on a scale, and then we would talk about it, and then eventually you want to move up in the scale. So I can access that, and I can share it to everybody again.
Please do that. With you kind of having your eyes already on it, what are your thoughts? Do you think that it would be beneficial of having it facilitated, or do you think that's something that we could have the discussion ourselves?
I mean, I think it could go either way. I mean, I think it's always great to have a facilitator to bring up things and knowledge and experiences from other districts that we might not consider. But at the same time, with it's our first time doing it, well, maybe that would be a reason to have a facilitator, honestly. And then if we do a good job and we see that it's something we can repeat year after year, then we would at least have this as a baseline to decide if we need an extra facilitator or not. Because it does seem like it should be pretty straightforward. But
Okay. Is there anyone else that would like to weigh in on this topic? Vice President Eslick? Board Member Eslick,
I feel
I
like
am
you
so
did that on
sorry.
purpose.
No, I
Every
didn't.
time.
I promise I did not. Go
I
ahead.
felt like it was intentional. I agree. I think that having the facilitator would be helpful since it's the first time. We have a lot of, aside from Ryan with, 2 terms of service, we have a lot of newer board members, and none of us have done this sort of thing before. So I think there would be value in, it's not a lot of money, considering hopefully we can train the process, and then maybe next time we won't need to have a facilitator. But first time around, I think it would be valuable.
Thank you. Board Member Murdoch, you're not Vice President, sir, or President anymore.
No,
What are your thoughts?
I would agree. I think having a facilitator the first time through would be very wise to be able to help steer the conversation, especially if there's any vast discrepancies in some of our answers and stuff, to be able to bring us back in terms of having the discussion of whatever those discrepancies might be. I think the first time through, it's a very minimal cost. I think you would be wise to do a facilitator, and then to the other point, if you can go it alone, but I would probably even in the future continue to have a facilitator do it. I think that's really good. So,
Okay. Anyone else would like to weigh in? All right, so the direction that I'm hearing is we're gonna get the date scheduled for us to go and get the survey issued to the full board, and then obviously we'll have a 2-week period. And again, we can have a longer period to do the survey if y'all would like a longer period, but they're just wanting at least a 2-week gap between the facilitation and the completion of the survey. So we will get that out, and we'll communicate with Ms. Ismer to make sure MSBA is to the table to schedule all that. All right, well, that completes our second item, and this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.